Luigi Giussani's The Religious Sense. I'm really glad that you decided to come join us tonight. We decided to organize this event to mark the publication of a new translation of The Religious Sense, which was just released. Maria, if you can hold up your copy. Just released, and we hope is going to make more accessible to those of us who are English speakers, Giussani's insights in this text, which are profound insights about the nature of human reason and freedom, the infinite desires of the human heart, and what it means to have an experience of God. We're grateful to Father Paul and Fisher House for hosting us and for enabling us to open up this event to all of you, to the community. Because we've seen, and speaking for myself here, we've seen that the religious sense and the insights that Giussani articulates in this text have the power to completely transform life, to bring freedom and vitality to the most ordinary and seemingly mundane moments of our daily lives. And I think I'm speaking for many of us when I say that this text has changed radically the gaze that we have on our lives, on giving us hope in the way that we look at ourselves and other people, on our work, even when it's difficult, and on injustices in the world, even like the war in Ukraine. So I'm really grateful for this moment and to have with us a few speakers who have encountered Giussani's thought in one way or another and are here to share their experience and their own insights with us so as to illuminate the promise that the text has for each one of us. So I will now hand it over to Irene Galandra to introduce them.
Yes, hi, I'm Irene, and I will chairing the conversation so that we could have a lot of sort of thoughts going back and forth between us all. I would like to introduce to you all our speakers. We've invited Father Pascal Ute, and he's an assistant priest at the parish of St. James the Less and St. Helens at Colchester. We have Professor Maria Viali, who's Professor of Applied Mathematics and Theoretical Physics at the University of Cambridge and Fellow at Newnham. And then we've got Reverend Dr. Arabella Milburn Robinson, who is Dean and Chaplain at Selwyn College and also Chaplain at Newnham since September. She's got degrees and research interests in both literature and theology. So welcome to you all. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And I would like to start straight away with our first question, which is a very sort of simple one, as in how you encountered the work of The Religious Sense by Giussani, and what did the book leave in your heart? Father Pascal, would you like to?
Happily. So good afternoon. I'm not part of the community, but Giulio, just in front of us here, is part of the community, and he's in the parish where I work. And they're a very different family, in a good way. You go to their house, and one of the things that strikes you is that they don't have a TV. And I say that because when Giulio handed me the book, and also the authenticity of their life, it intrigued me. What's the spirituality that kind of makes that family do what it does in the kind of world that we live in? I would say in terms of how I've responded to the book, I have a niece, one niece over here, Talia, and very recently she's learned a 3-letter word that has changed conversation. In fact, when she uses this word, sometimes conversation never ends, and the word is why. And I would say that it's that childlike wonder that this book invites you back into, and especially as a priest who is often asked to respond to people's questions or situations, this, as Sophia beautifully put it, validates the human questions that we have and causes us again to re-encounter reality, and for me as a priest, to re-encounter Christ, as he gently suggests that there's something deeper than just my immediate reaction or experience, to that invitation to look with a sense of wonder and to ever go deeper by having that at the forefront. There's a fearlessness that he has, and we described it as somebody who knows the way, not afraid for you to go down this way or that way, because he knows the way, and that comes across on every page. And I found that deeply enlightening, just to be able to go deeper into some of those fundamental questions when looking at life.
Thank you. Maria.
Yeah, so for me, this book is something that I encountered as a teenager. In particular, I was a very restless teenager with a lot of questions, and it's as if everything I had seemed too small for my heart. So I remember really well when I was 16, I lived in the suburbs of Milan, and I was always going to the train station, and I was dreaming about what was the farthest destination I could reach by train. And it was a place where I finally ended up living 10 years later. It was Düsseldorf in Germany. And I was always dreaming that finally going to that faraway place could solve my issues and things that were too small for my heart. So I had a plan to run away and whatever. So then I met this teacher in my high school who was someone of the community that Religious Fund founded. And I was so struck because he understood there was something that was not right with me, that I was not really there when I was in the lessons and so on. And then he came to me and said, "What's going on? What's happening?" And I said, things are too small for me. I can't live here. My house is too small. I feel like a big fish. I should swim in a bigger swimming pool. And so I want to go to Düsseldorf. And he said, "Good." And it was so amazing because I thought that being a religious person, he was going to tell me off. I said, no, you should really be where you are and love what you have and be content with things. And instead he says, wow, that's amazing. The sign that you have this restlessness is a sign of how big is your heart. And I can tell you that your heart and the desire that you have in your heart is so big that not even the full universe will answer it. And then he said, but I think you can start living the reality you have at hand with this desire in you and tell me, and I can walk with you to say what you're going to discover through that. And if we are not going to find something that you can see that starts responding to your heart, I'm going to have to do something with you. And I really love that attitude because it was not moralistic at all. It was really just the first person who looked at my desire, at my thirst for an infinite joy, an infinite, something so big that I couldn't even define as not a course or not something I had to fix within me, but as something that was my resource to really enter reality with, as an adventure to find what I was looking for. So it was really life-changing for me.
So I think, and this connects to what we've already heard from Father Pascal, that I first encountered this book embodied in people who had themselves encountered this book, and it seemed to have really made them very different. My parents began to be involved with movement when I was a student myself. So they are both theologians, and they encountered Alessandra Gherardin, who I know many of you here know. And everything about her, and about Pier di Simone, and about a series of other people we began to meet in movement was just very different. They were radically open and full of a kind of radiant joy, but also seriousness. And they were always inviting me in, and inviting everyone else in, and not being afraid to say, "Rowan Williams, come round for pasta," and assuming he would say yes, because of course he would say yes, because they shared the most fundamental thing, the love of Christ and the joy in their faith. So through that involvement and through my family, I had an opportunity to go to meetings. And I was also, at the time, I knew quite well some young chaplains in this university, Andrew Davison and John Hughes, who were beginning themselves to be intrigued by this galvanizing spirituality they were meeting in these individuals, and were trying to work out how to live the central forms of life, the school of community, and things like that, and see what that was like. I remember particularly Andrew was both fascinated and confused because it felt more to him like his roots in Protestant evangelical Christianity and its small groups than the way that it would expect people to be quite almost proselytizing about their faith in a way he hadn't for a long time. But they couldn't help but want to be drawn in, and I went to an early attempt to do a School of Community, a Scuola di Comunità at Jesus College in Cambridge when I was just a master's student myself. And I was amazed by what was drawn out of me in that encounter and how I was saying truths I didn't know about myself in this new environment of a more radical openness and expectation of encounter. But since then, I've been following my own calling, and I've been for 7 years a parish priest, for 4 years a parish priest and for 7 years in Lincolnshire, alongside my husband, who's also a priest. And then I found myself in this new post, myself now a chaplain, with students of my own, as well as children of my own, and I think that will come up in the conversation, how we deal with some of these great big questions through our encounters with our children. And at the first dinner I went to at Newnham, I sat down opposite a very beautiful woman, and we got talking, and we discovered we had this connection through movement. So I think Providence put us down on opposite sides of the table that day, and I was able to pick up all this that had been sitting in my memory and my past, like a potential energy ready to be released again, just at a moment when I'm asking myself questions as someone with young people in my care about how to be a good representative in my new community, yes, of my faith, but also in a community of many faiths, how to support others in their faith, and on a larger plane, how to simply draw young people of all faiths and none into a quest for deeper meaning. And so I think reading this book has come at an important moment for me as I think anew about that question.
Yeah, just touching on what you said, Arabella, there, and I think it probably the whole idea of communion liberation. There's Father Giussani, as you read the book, he's a very well-read man, be it poems or literature, and you can see that the spirituality has affected how he sees everything. He's able to pick a poem and bring out a point. But this thing about communion really struck me, actually challenged me. I think a good book, you guys would know better than me, is not just something that you delight in, but that really challenges you. So I'm in a place for myself where I'm out of seminary for 3 years, and I was challenged that I don't currently have a community that releases potential in me, not my parishioners, but that brotherhood. So he speaks about one of his things is of the little child. He speaks about the risk necessary to really answer those questions or really go deeper. Of a little child, like seeing a dark room and being afraid, couldn't go there. But then if his mother took his hand, he'd go to any room, be it light or dark. And he then immediately says, I'll give you another image, and he speaks about a seed, how a seed outside of its environment, no matter how much potential there is in it, on its own, outside of its environment, can't release. But once it's placed inside of its environment, it flowers. And I think this was, if we're really going to ask ourselves those deeper questions, it's not about reading a book in isolation and having abstract ideas, but we do actually need to be in a community in which that the reality can come up and be alive. And yeah, so I just thought about that.
No, absolutely, and it seems to me that there's a sort of common thread here on what this book has left with you all as a sort of initial seed and anything else that has been growing inside your hearts. And it's this quest, this search. And I think it ties very well with the title that we've wanted to give to this conversation. The human person becomes a tireless searcher. And that is taken from a bigger, longer sentence that I'm going to read, where Giussani says, life is hunger, thirst, and passion for an ultimate object, which looms over the horizon and yet always lies beyond it. When this is recognized, man becomes a tireless searcher. And you all have given the sort of hint on the fact that, like Giussani in this book, and you, Arabella, have mentioned sort of opposites, this experience of there's a search, and for Giussani this search is incredibly positive. It's positive, and the sadness that sometimes this search evokes, because if we are in a quest for something, we imply a sort of absence. And Giussani also gives positivity to this absence, to this sadness that we might experience. And he actually gets to define it, the sadness, as a spark that is something, is totally opposed to the idea of despair. And what I have noticed in my life a lot, and sometimes I can pick it up also in the life of my teenage daughters, is that as soon as sadness comes to the horizon of my heart, my first answer is to try and fix it. And no matter whether, how many years I've lived in my life and how, less years my daughters have lived, there's this tendency of stop it. Whereas Giussani here in this search puts the two together as a positive human spark. And I would like to know if the three of you could go a little bit deeper into this experience of sadness as something beautiful because connected with this search. Not sure, Arabella, if this is something, if the question is clear and if it resonates with your life.
It definitely does, and actually, most immediately, it resonates with my life as a mother. I think as a mother, as you've already suggested, Ernie, but also as a mother of a flock, and also as a mother of a kind in my student community, you get very desperate to solve people's problems. I certainly think about bedtime with my 7-year-old, where he always claims at the last minute, as a last-ditch attempt to get more time, that he is desperately hungry or thirsty. And I always have a fear in my heart he might be genuinely starving and incapable of carrying on through the night if I don't provide something. And you've got this paranoia that your child will be something less than completely full. And when they cry or they ache, you've got this desperate need to make everything all right in their lives. And I think that's partly because they're a deep, and all others are to us in general, our friends as well, this could go for any category of person we interact with. Others are a deep sort of mirror of fears we have for ourselves. So when one's children cry and ache and seem inconsolable, you're desperate to heal that sorrow. And is it even for their own sake? Or is it because you're frightened of confronting that reality that's there for you too? That sadness, that sorrow, that lack, that need are part of our human reality. And it's a limit and a boundary of life. But does it need to not be a fruitful one? Surely it must be a fruitful one. Surely, in the way that Giussani is so clearly articulating, all of life is a given. With the students as well, I find that they've got these yearnings. I'm particularly thinking of romantic yearnings that a student might have, where they're restless for a romantic fulfillment, let's say, and that love isn't reciprocated. Sure, chaplains in the room have dealt with that more than once. It's an awful, awful feeling. And yet also you get the sense that it's not really about the girl or the boy and whether they're going to say yes or not. There's a deeper yearning beneath it. And the temptation is to pursue imminent goals which will always frustrate us. Yeah, I think at the heart of being a follower of Christ is an experience of something being still over the horizon, always lying beyond it. And that will involve something sorrowful. Exile is a really rich and poignant vein of Christian reflection. Having a true home elsewhere, being a stranger and pilgrim who's looking for it, whether it's in just or the whole. And the quotation that Gisani takes from Jack Kerouac, of that cry, take me home, actually take me to where there is no home, where all home has somehow vanished in everyone being at home in one place. Give me my family, but actually that's the family of Anti that is my family. And that makes me think of children again, or our own cries in pain or sorrow when we might still say, or think, I want my mother, I want the ultimate source of comfort and safety. I want to go home. I think we still sometimes say it in our hearts, I want to go home. What do we mean now, and what do we mean as Christians? But I think fundamentally, and Gisani certainly articulates, this sadness can be a gift. And Gisani, as you said in your questionnaire, says that its opposite, not its amplification, is despair. Meaning, I think, that sadness acknowledging the possibility of the absent good is still a form of hope, can be a form of hope, has hope. So we shouldn't try and solve either our children's problems or our students' every problem. We should help them reframe their problems in light of a deepened desire. Just like Paul, like
Yes, Father Castano, you get quite a lot, as you were mentioning in your first reply.
Yeah, Irene, I remember actually one incident of, I've only done one suicide funeral, and the mother wanted to sort of see afterwards, and she came with questions, and I remember one point within the conversation, she was looking at me like, tell me something, then tell me something, surely you're supposed to tell me something. And for one, I didn't know what to respond to, and I didn't want to just give her something trite. This does give you a bit of a vocabulary into, like, well, how might you practically deal with that situation and acknowledge the beauty of, like, that question practically in a way. As you were speaking, I'm just reminded about how, like, there's just great power in that paradox and an invitation almost to, like, to be able to go deeper into that place. For me, he's referring to a different place. He's talking about fear, so hopefully like this connects, but there's a place where he talks about fear in terms of going deeper, but he says that that's predicated on something primary, which is the awe and the wonder. But fear actually is a fear that we're going to lose something, which already acknowledges that we have something, there's something beautiful, and the fear is that that will be taken away. So it's almost about, like, what's your posture before the question? And there's a place where I think he speaks about when the angel came to Mary, and she said, like, how will this be? And Mary's posture is one of positivity, that there is that sense that this is going to end in some beautiful way, but how will this be? And I wonder if it's taking that sadness and saying, actually, there's something beautiful about this. And we can genuinely answer the question with them, how will this be? Not that we're coming with a fixed thing, because that's the beauty of it. We're going to meet Christ together in this, trying to find out where the beauty in the sadness is, something.
Yes, absolutely.
I really think I don't have much to say of the beautiful things that the two of you said, so I will be really quick, but what you were saying really makes me touch upon a kind of related point that it's saying here, when if at some point it cites Dostoevsky, when he talks about in the book The Devils, is page 53, when he says, he succeeded in touching some of the deepest chords in his little friend's heart and in evoking in him the first and still vague sensation of that eternal and sacred longing which many a chosen spirit once having tasted and experienced it, will never afterwards exchange for some cheap feeling of satisfaction. So I really like that because it's as if so it says that somehow someone is really friends to you when this deep longing that you have in your heart that generates sadness has space in that relationship. Because I often see that there is a big solitude in life of my students whenever they are not able to have anybody they can share this deep longing with. When everybody tries to say, I'm gonna fix you, or come on, be content, why do you still complain? So, and to find a friendship that is able to look at your heart without saying, stop being sad, but accompanying you in the path to find an answer to that sadness, or to find a hint that makes you move forward. This is the first source of companionship, this thing that touching the deepest chords of the heart. And I was really, this book, the reason why I really am so happy that we are presenting it to many of you who come from many different backgrounds is because I was reading it with a friend of mine. So I was a PhD student in Edinburgh, and I had my two best friends I was going in the gym with. So one was a Muslim from Pakistan, and one was an Italian girl who was, from generation atheist. So she never really was touched upon any religious thoughts in her life. But at some point the conversation was always going about this sadness. And so we decided to start reading the book together. And it was such a beautiful adventure because all of them, after a few weeks, we were regularly meeting in the PhD room, the physics department. They say, wow, I feel much less lonely because there is a place every week where I can come and share what is happening in my journey without censoring the sadness that I feel. And I was really privileged. I learned so much from them about my own heart, because I feel lonely, not when I'm physically lonely, but when there is nobody I can share the deepest chords of my heart with. So yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it's almost a shame to kind of stop you to kind of go to the next question. I am, what you're saying is so true that it's truly touching my heart. So thank you. So now, because we are in Cambridge, because we are in the university sort of chaplaincy, and because we have amongst us a lot of people whose jobs, from students to professors, is to study within the science environment, we were all incredibly struck by what Giussani says in the first premise of the book, when he talks about science and faith as though the two are inseparably united, and their unity is somewhat necessary in each person to find the truth of reality. And as a scientist, I guess finding the truth in reality is a sort of big, sort of everyday goal. I'm an historian, so I probably I have also the sort of desire for truth in reality. This unity goes somehow, however, beyond the usual debate about science and faith, in which we either hear that science rendered faith obsolete, or that science deals with the how and faith deals with the why. And as if they are dimensions that are totally unrelated. And so I would really like to know whether sort of quest for unity within science and faith, or Giussani brings up in the first premise. So clearly, I connected it with, people's careers and interests, but clearly this is something that goes beyond what we are studying or what we do. What is your experience of this unity that Giussani talks about in relation to the truth of all ourselves? In Mariella.
I don't want to talk too much because there are so many things to be said, but I think that the approach that Giussani takes about it is really original, is a very uncommon way of thinking. So it starts from the fact that if you want to know something, the method to know something is dictated by the object. Okay, so if I want to know who's sitting at the back, I have to, put up my neck and just look at the person. So, or if I want to solve a mathematical equation, I have to take some steps. So to know that a plus b times a minus b equals a square minus b square, I have to follow the mathematical procedure. If I want to know what water is made of, I have to look for the chemical compositions. But I don't know, if I want to understand, for example, why women's rights have to be the same as men's rights, then I have to follow a more philosophical or logical path. But then he says, what about the questions that are so pressing in our life, which is the question of the trust? So can I trust Father Pascal is not going to kill me in the next half an hour? Or can I trust that my mom loves me? So these are the questions that are really, really basic in us, and that somehow we build up on this question in everything we live. And he says, even there is a method, and it's reasonable to answer this question. They do not belong to the irrational. So the way is the method of signs, so that you keep collecting signs that your mother loves you until eventually you are certain about that, in the same way in which you are certain of the mathematical equation you are writing. And I really like that, because somehow, as a human being, I am one. And I don't want to have, I don't want to have a split reality in front of me. So when I'm at work and I do my research, when I go back and decide to trust my children, I'm the same person, is the same. So I like, because through the way that the method of knowledge is imposed by the object I want to know, it gives the human being the possibility of doing a united path of knowledge. And there are two examples that I really like, which are not in the first chapter, but a bit later, when he says, so this thing is the thing of the sign, so there is something that, I read it because it says better. So, the method by which I understand that my mother loves me and through which I'm certain that many people are my friends cannot be established mechanically. My intelligence intuits that the only reasonable meaning, the only reasonable interpretation of the convergence of a given set of signs is this. And I was thinking, wow, the biggest scientific discovery that happened in my lifetime that relates with me is the discovery of the Higgs boson, this particle that was found at CERN. And again, I thought, wow, there we didn't see the boson. We collected so many signs, we collected thousands of signs until it became statistically relevant and statistically significant that we found the Higgs. So I was thinking, also in science, very often we do use the method of signs. We collect signs until eventually we are certain that something exists. So I like it because it gave the same dignity of my search for something I can trust, something I can be certain of in the moral sphere, to what I can be certain of in physics. Of course, it's different kind of science, but the method is the same. And the other thing here, which relates to me and to a lot of my colleagues, independently of their religious views, is when he talks about the structural disproportion. So he mentions a mathematician, Severi, who was a friend of Einstein, who describes really well this mechanism, that he says the more the research advances, the more the particular horizon which I approach points beyond to yet another, thus convincing me to perceive my victory as a temporary thing, as merely something which would then urge me on towards another X, something else. And this is what makes science beautiful, because you never possess the reality. So I think even in theoretical physics, which is what I do, you understand something, and this makes you understand that you do not understand something else. So after you do find something, the reality pushes you in a dynamism which never stops. And this is what makes fascinating science, and this is what keeps scientists really humble, because there is always much more than what we know, than what we don't know, than what we know. So I like, because somehow thinking about your experience in the way in which Giussani makes me think, makes me see that there are points of unity that I can really identify in my experience as a scientist. I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Father Pascal.
Yeah, the unity of method there. Maybe just pick it up from where you are. There's another lovely image that he gives. That if you like follow those signs, so for me as a Catholic priest, it kind of just screams out to me about the sacraments and the way that they point necessarily. It talks about the world being a sign. And he says, like, you know, if we get up to if we dare and risk to go up the mountain, and we go up to that mountain, we realise that actually it's only the bottom of a far bigger mountain. And as soon as I read that in the book, I did a little triangle and a massive one. It's like, that's so cool because it does lead us to that greater place of wonder. So I think, yeah, acknowledging the unity of the method there to get to the deepest truth, which is still like an ongoing mystery. But it's a mystery that sheds light on all of reality. C.S. Lewis has this beautiful quote where he says that I believe in Christ for the same reason I believe in the sun. You know, I see the sun, but by it I see everything. And I think that's what happens when we go deeper into the mystery, is that the whole makes more sense, whilst calling us into the more as well. So there's lovely unity there, and I think it's needed for our time that people use the power of their minds as scientists to be like, actually this is applicable for all the questions of your heart. Because just touching on the other thing, I think great despair and sadness is that people come before the great questions of life and believe that there is no answer, or they walk away from it believing that there's nothing to be said about the deepest questions of our heart, and that's
I kept thinking as I was reading Giussani on science and faith and kind of reciprocality he was establishing there of Carlo Rovelli's writings on physics, where he so much emphasizes mystery as something which inspires and leads scientists on, and sort of the understanding and description of science that sees it as much more analogous to a creative or imaginative art than maybe some of our prevailing assumptions might make it, that's looking to fully describe and illuminate and is drawn almost by beauty. I mean, earlier, Maria, you were talking about your students and you were saying, I want to show them how quantum mechanics is beautiful. And I thought, yes, absolutely, why not? And how, if you are somebody who is engaged in, I don't know, developing new hypotheses in physics, for example, which Maria would know a lot more about than I do, you're also engaged in an imaginative, creative act that may even require, as one of Carlo Rovelli's books particularly talks about, long meditative times, in nature, just dwelling contemplatively in a way that's almost monastic, until things are newly revealed to you. I don't think we think of science as being like that. We think of spiritual quests as being like that, but actually scientific breakthroughs happen that way too.
It's very unexpected, like on a book that has a title as The Religious Sense. So much of it is dedicated to really going deeper in this unity of all reality, and I think it's I have not encountered another book that is so united within faith and reality. Going back to the book, of course, I mean, those who have read the book, those who know it, might remember the sort of most famous quote of the book that gets repeated and quoted over and over again. And I would like to read it now and see whether together we can talk a little bit more about this. So the famous quote goes like this. Giussani says, "Picture yourself being born, coming out of your mother's womb at the age you are now, at this very moment, in terms of your development and consciousness. What would be the first absolutely your initial reaction. If I were to open my eyes for the first time in this instant, emerging from my mother's womb, I would be overpowered by the wonder and awe of things as a presence. I would be bowled over and amazed by the stupefying repercussion of a presence which is expressed in current language by the word thing. Things, that's something, thing, which is a concrete and, if you please, banal version of the word being. Being not as some abstract entity, but as a presence which I do not make myself, but which I find, a presence which imposes itself upon me. And he goes on, talking about how the presence of reality is inherently positive because it exists. It's a bit of what you were already talking just a minute ago. This positive reality. And one of the many challenging questions I kind of grapple with sometimes is how to show my daughters this positive in reality, which of course then is linked to the fact that if reality is positive now, it's everything is positive, all is good. So even difficult circumstances are not an enemy to our own fulfillment. I observe at times a sort of reluctance, also on my part, but on my daughter's part as well, to leave all reality and being a little bit scared of the things that instead are hard. And we all wait somehow in a corner waiting for the heartbeats to pass, an argument to stop, peace to be made, and then carry on. And this dynamic really fascinates me, and I am not here to kind of put an end to this, but I would be curious to know whether you live this dynamic in this relationship with a positive reality as Giussani describes it. And if you do, if you can share your experiences on this.
Sure. Again, so something practical I'll speak about celebrating Mass, just as a sort of a place, something I do every day. So I remember very early on into priesthood, sitting at a table with priests, and one priest said to me, or was in the conversation, he said, sometimes you forget when you've done if you've done the consecration or not. And I was like, really? I was like, I never want to be in that place. And whether it's me not being a good preacher or not, but people oftentimes would comment more about the liturgy, and I think I always try to enter there's a worship song that says, "May I never lose the wonder." And after having that conversation with that priest, I've made that a personal prayer. Like when I go there, I never want to lose the wonder of what goes on here. Because it can be the root. It's not always my experience when I do everything else in life. But everything should be that kind of wonder, and it's at least one place in the day where I quite consciously never lose the wonder. It means my masses go on a little bit, so go to the other mass if you want it to be shorter. But something brings this up. He says, radical amazement is to the understanding of the realness of God what clarity and distinctness are to the comprehension of mathematical ideas. Devoid of wonder, we remain deaf to the sublime. And I have to be honest, I don't think that's always my response when I'm speaking with parishioners or doing the daily chores and tasks, but that is the reality underneath. And so retraining ourselves to that radical amazement, that wide-eyed, and allowing ourselves to be that. I shared with Sophia, just where I think this to be real. I'm not sure if I'll be able to share it anywhere else, so I'll share it here. John Paul II, I'm a big fan of his. So there was a young girl who had suffered greatly in her life, and she'd left the church, and some of her friends got to go to Rome, and they said, like, come along, and they managed to get an audience with John Paul II that she could go in by herself. And when she came out of the room, she was like in tears, really, really broken, but full of joy. And they were just eager, like, what did he say to you? What did he say? And she said, it wasn't what he said. It was how he listened. And I just imagine what the experience would have been like for someone to hear your questions as real and just to so absorb them as real, with that sense of wonder and amazement that you felt listened to, seen in such a deep way. I think that's one practical way in which, like, we can enter into moments with people, that radical amazement. So I feel very challenged by what I'm called to live, but what we get to live as well. Yeah, a sense of that.
So interesting what you just said, Father Pascal, about being seen versus seeing. I mean, that hadn't occurred to me at all, but it makes me think now of prayer, really. Both prayer before the Orthodox mode of prayer, before an icon, where the emphasis is all on being seen. And a memory I have now of being with an Orthodox friend in Oxford, and there was an exhibition of icons in the gallery of Christchurch, I think, and how part of it was icons, and the next room was 14th and 15th century Italian paintings. And once we got to the second room, she just wasn't interested because it had none of the compelling being seen that was speaking to her through these icons. And but I suppose that makes me think that when we put ourselves before God in prayer and put our reality, that's such an important word for Gisani, isn't it, before God in prayer, we begin to understand its significance in a new way. And that's part of cultivating radical amazement, is to expose ourselves to that being seen in prayer or with holy people. But actually, what I was going to say before I heard what Pascal just said was that this story or this imagined story in Gisani of the new birth, of being born again from the mother's womb, which comes from Jesus' words to Nicodemus in the Gospel, doesn't it actually, was that it made me think of what it was like to give birth. Pascal's just spoken about celebrating the Eucharist. I'm an Anglican priest, I can speak about giving birth. But my experience of giving birth was one of the most extraordinary moments of my life. Of course, it's for anyone who has, I think. And you're waiting to meet this new person who's been present with you within your womb. And you're prepared, in a sense, for all kinds of astonishment, of amazement, of radical amazement, maybe. And you're perhaps waiting to see that whether they're a boy or a girl, or I don't know, or to name them even. And I was not prepared for the astonishment. I remember laughing in my amazement of discovering they were a separate person, and that was the most radically amazing thing, and that I couldn't have prepared myself for that expectation. So that was what it brought to mind for me. But one of your questions really was, how do you live this dynamic in your everyday life? This dynamic of expecting presence, the stupefying repercussion of presence, and I think that is really hard in the ordinariness and the exhaustion of being someone who cares for others in any respect, especially. But I think for me it begins with expecting life to have a certain poetic quality, and I find it very interesting how drawn to poetry and how much communication and writing that Gisani does through the poems of others. Is both when I read poetry, it has that effect of representing and reclothing reality for me that brings me back into presence. But also I think if we expect our lives to be poetic, and of course a poem has a writer behind it, our lives have a purpose behind them. If we expect it to be full of connection and signing, and if we look for those parts, day to day, week to week, year to year, those images and metaphors and events that connect and resonate against one another in the way that image and language does within a poem. That's one of the ways in which I try and live that dynamic in my everyday life.
Wow. Yes, no, I think you already said immediately, but the thing for me about that, so I can see it. So first of all, it's radical because it's true. It makes you think that I'm not giving things to myself. So it's as if everything is a gift. You know, whatever feeling you have in front of something, it's a given in a sense. It helps me in the moment take a step backward, you know, from my reaction and say, yeah, but wait a second, this is there, whether I want it or not. Well, I didn't decide that thing to be there, and it's an enormous source of peace, no matter what the thing is, because I always tell my students, you know, we do, whenever you do research, you know, you don't know what's coming out of it. You know. Whatever it is a given. You don't decide. You know, if you have the first thing is to be in front of the data as something you're not giving yourself. So, and then start an adventure with it without pretending that demanding to immediately grasp. So it's an adventure into something that you do not give yourself. But then it says something so beautiful that for me it's an extra step that it says, at this moment, if I'm attentive, that is, if I'm mature, then I cannot deny that the greatest and most profound evidence is that I do not make myself. I'm not making myself. I do not give myself being or the reality which I am given. This is the moment of maturity when I discover myself to be dependent upon something else. And wow, I have to read it more and more because I think I understand only a little fraction of it. But what I understand is it's a huge source of companionship, because looking at yourself, even in your solitude, as I'm not making myself, not only I didn't decide how I am, but in this moment, so how I enter the department, whether I'm tired or I'm sad or I'm pissed off or I'm happy, whatever. So I don't decide, I'm not giving myself. So it's the acceptance of myself as something given. To me, it's a huge source of friendship and it's a huge source of peace. And in fact, I really like when it relates it with the true prayer. So the true prayer is not repeating formula, but it's really to be in connection with this mysterious source that is making me now. And I'm repeating it without fully understanding it, but as something that I desire to understand more. Because then, for me, it's the possibility of living the relationship not only with everything, but with myself, which is the hardest bit, as a given, no? And as something to have the wonder in front of myself now, the way I am, the way I'm made now, with my tiredness, with my brain that doesn't work really well sometimes, you know, whatever I am now. So I really like that.
It's fascinating dynamic. So we have reached the last question, which in a way,
You did such an
amazing.
amazing chat.
Doing very big.
55 minutes and the last
You are great speakers. Yeah. No, it's very interesting because when we were writing these questions, we finished with a question that brings back the accent onto more questions, and I'm gonna formulate it in a second, but I was very struck by the fact that just now, as we started, we're also coming to an end by putting the stress on to radical amazement and wonder and awe that you all have kept repeating throughout. And somehow this connects with our last question that it kind of struck us all to think, to read this book and to really see how we are living in a society that tends to be wanting answers. It's okay to have questions as long as you've got answers. And so to somehow conclude how we've started, it seems that this book keeps putting our questions, our desires, our radical amazement, our wonder at its center, as if the soul of it is this big awe in front of reality. And I would like to ask you, within this here and now, how could we all be here certain that all these questions can be a source of enrichment for us all? We don't want to, be limited to those are those that have just got questions. We've got answers. We've met an answer, of course. We are here because Giussani did meet an answer. But what he wanted to leave us all by reading this book is to really look carefully at everything that we desire, to make those questions bigger. Do you see these questions as an enrichment for all your lives now? And if so, why? Yeah, so I didn't make the questions by myself. It was kind of friends, Sophia, Giulio, with Maria, so clearly four hearts, 4 lives came together to ask you all of this. It
was brave enough to start.
So
Arabelle.
I'm going to say something, and I don't know whether it will be helpful. And I think there is a question or something that intrigues me about the whole book, which is that it is an incredibly faithful book, which nonetheless strikes me, maybe strikes students who've read it from all kinds of backgrounds. I mean, you mentioned introducing it to an atheist and a Muslim. Strikingly, and I'm cautious in using this phrase, because I think it's only half the picture, non-confessional. Strikingly little references to the Bible. The only treatment of Revelation is the final chapter, where rather beautifully and wonderfully he frames even the discrete and definite unveiling in history of who God is in Jesus Christ as mystery, a source of ever-expanding mystery too. Mystery not as airy-fairy disengagement, and of course we've learned that, we've been trained in that through the whole course of the book, but as a continuation of completely authentic engagement. But he kind of restrains himself from talking directly about Christ so much, and yet Christ is there throughout. And that's something that really interests me. And I don't know, that just feels like something I want to raise now. At the kind of close of our conversation, just at that close.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love it, and especially because it seems to me that it's that sometimes we are all in a kind of polarized society, in any kind of polarization. So somehow even the social media tells us to group with the people who think exactly like us, and we try to just find what we think in every context. And instead, I think here, it tells us how we discover all human beings with brothers and essential in our human adventure, because we share the most important thing with anybody. It doesn't matter, what we think, what was their experience. And this is really and it's something that I've seen in the people who live, this experience in their life. There is this openness that comes in recognizing not only the same heart in every human being, in every religion or life, but in recognizing that the other is the possibility for me to grow in this quest for the mystery. So every other human being is essential to my life, to go deeper in who I am. And this is something that the world needs so much because, the fact that the other is a beautiful opportunity. So few people say it, maybe we have to say it, but we don't really mean it. So I really like that.
I think, though it's not confessional, I do think it does lead us into deeper encounters quite concretely in prayer. I was sharing with Julia on the way up how one of the frustrations for me is preparing sometimes people for sacraments who don't necessarily want to be there. They want the ceremony, but not to really commit to what it is. And I think the deepest response to life's questions are not just abstract ideas, but concrete commitment. He speaks about that somewhere here. And so for us, I think it has to lead us back into the mystery, back into prayer, where we can be like that. And then just a quote perhaps that maybe I'll finish with in a way. It says, the result of revelation, which ultimately we come to, must be the intensifying of mystery as mystery. It must not reduce mystery like a human being saying, I understand or I get it, but rather deepen it. In this way, it's understood and yet always more understood as mystery. And then in the side, if you check out my book, I've written everywhere. I sort of heard that as saying the fruit of this mystery is not just comprehension, but deeper communion. Because ultimately that's what it's about, communion with God, and communion with others, actually. So I'd hope that would be a fruit of our reading of the book, is to go to prayer and to emerge from prayer more in communion with reality and others.
Thank you very much for this conversation. I would invite us all to thank our friends, to have shared their experience about reading the religious sense and living the religious sense with us all. So, first of all, I would like to it was great and very moving. And just to conclude, I would like to say that the author of this book, Luigi Giussani, was a Catholic priest who founded a movement called Communion and Liberation. And this event has been organized by us friends of this movement. On this little table here, there's a very fancy registration sheet that I can put on this other table here, where if you wanted to, you could put your name and your email, because one of the things that also Arabella mentioned, how Giussani taught us all about his charisma and his faith is by something called School of Community. Effectively, a moment of sharing, something that he has written. Right now, we are reading all together The Religious Sense, and we are meeting for School of Community every Wednesday here at 8:45 in Fisher House. So we've started from page 1, and we're gonna read the whole book together to discover together, to keep that radical amazement open, to have that promise that Sophia mentioned at the beginning alive for us. So if you would like to come, and you can, or if you would like just to be added to our newsletter to know what we are up to, please leave your name and email and we will be in touch. I would like to really thank again Father Pascal, Maria, and Reverend Arabella for having agreed with a very simple and straightforward yes to such a important conversation.